Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Welcome to Museum on Main. I'm Ken McLennan. I'm the curator here at the museum, and today we are presenting a panel of artists from our current exhibit, Textures of Remembrance. Oh Lord, I've forgotten something. May I help me out?
I think it's Vietnamese writers and artists who remember the 30th of April or something like that.
Something like Vietnamese artists and writers on the Vietnamese Diaspora, something like that. Anyway, Textures of Remembrance is what we've been calling it the whole time. So, one of our panelists is wearing a little pint. She will slot in when she arrives. Having given you the title, we've got a couple dozen works of art, all trying to capture some aspect of April 30th, 1975, and what came after. The end of the Vietnam War, the capture of Saigon by the North Vietnamese Army, and the end of the Vietnamese Republic, and a whole bunch of people having to flee and grow up in other countries. And that's sort of the focus of the work in the show. So the artists we have today, next to me is Son Trinh. He's a Vietnamese American visual storyteller. Born in a refugee camp in Galang, Indonesia, currently based in the Bay Area. He explores personal narratives of fellow refugee and immigrant community members. And his pictures are in the case opposite the wall there. You can check them out after the discussion part breaks up. So he's currently working on two projects. One is called Stories We Carry. That's a photo installation that empowers individuals from immigrant and refugee experiences. And the other one is called Silk Rise, another photo series that explores the intersectionality of the Vietnamese tradition and contemporary Vietnamese culture. Yeah, through Ao Dai, the garment. He's photographed in publications such as Banana Magazine, San Francisco Chronicle, Hyphen Magazine, Asian American Donor Program, and DSCO. When he's not out in the field, he's working as a cardiac registered nurse in the South Bay. Are you based at a particular hospital?
I work for Sutter.
Okay, Sutter.
Yeah.
I'm Kaiser. And on the far side there is Julie Thi Underhill. Julie is an artist, scholar, author, and educator based in Berkeley. Her primary visual media are drawing, painting, photography, and video. She holds interdisciplinary degrees from Evergreen State College. The BA in Fine Arts, Film, Video, and History, and an MA in Ethnic Studies from the UC Berkeley. She has published poetry, essay, and photography in books including Inheriting the War, Poetry and Prose by Descendants of Vietnam Veterans and Refugees, and Troubling Borders, an anthology of art and literature by Southeast Asian women in the diaspora. Her experimental film, Disappearance. I don't know if I got the parentheses in this precise there.
It works.
It works. Premiered at the SEA by SEA 2021 Film Festival. So is one of those, I'm assuming, is Southeast Asia?
Yes, the Southeast Asia is the second part. Yeah.
Oh, and here's Julie. Here's Terri. Okay, so let's finish Julie's fire. Premiered at the SEA by SEA 2021 Film Festival at the University of Washington in Seattle. Julie was a fall 2021 Mellon Arts practitioner and fellow at the Yale Study for the Center of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration, which supported her first photography monograph, Descendants of Champa, Portraits of Vietnam and Cambodia. She's also writing a memoir about foster care in Texas called Save. She's taught ethnic studies at UC Berkeley and Asian American studies at San Francisco State. And she's currently teaching at California College of the Arts in the Writing and Literature program as a senior adjunct professor. She's the managing editor and faculty advisor for CCA's long-standing literary journal Humble Pie. And her work, 21 Geelong Street, is on display here, and we will be talking about that over the course of this conversation. She's interested in vocabularies of remembrance amidst continuously remade notions of identity, belonging, and home. And then seated next to me is Terri Trang.
Yes, okay.
Has been dedicated to the nonprofit sector, focusing on promoting arts, culture, and humanities as catalysts for change. Her versatile experience encompasses roles as a museum educator, summer field trip curriculum developer, public programs and events manager, communications and social media coordinator, grant writer, and development and fundraising director. So a whole lot of really key support and programming stuff for places like us. As a first-generation American, born Vietnamese American, born to Vietnamese immigrants, Terri grew up always curious about her family roots, history, and traditions that inspired her love for the arts and culture. She holds a BA in Art History and History from the University of Maryland, College Park, and she further earned an MA in Museum Studies and an MBA from JFK University in 2016. And she currently serves as the Major Gifts Manager at the nonprofit Stop AAPI Foods. So thank you all for coming, and of course thank you all for coming. Pretty soon I will be able to stop talking and let these lovely people tell us the stuff you actually came here to hear. So I'm going to start with a pretty broad question here. Briefly, how would you characterize your experience growing up in the diaspora? I want to start with I imagine it's not easy to do. I'm going to ask Terri this.
Well, as Ken provided in my introduction, growing up Vietnamese American, especially in Maryland, I didn't always have that representation, and so growing up I didn't really feel fully connected to the diaspora until I entered college, because I discovered student organizations like Vietnamese Student Association, as well as Asian American Studies programs that actually had more in-depth history and representation of stories like my father and my mother, and I didn't always see that representation. And even though I grew up wanting to be even more connected and kind of fill in the missing pieces, it wasn't until I got into my adult life and understood that there was more to having the significance of April 30th. I knew that my dad and mom came from Vietnam after the war. I knew there was some significance, but in the historical textbooks that I had in my elementary to high school experience, it was only, I remember, a page and a half in the textbooks, and it always was from the perspective of American experience of coming in, helping as much as they could, and then we left, and then there wasn't really any story of why there was such a huge immigrant population coming. I mean, especially in Maryland, where it was really small, but I didn't understand the roots. And then I know I had family in Texas, and we went to visit them in Houston, and it was a bigger community, and I just didn't understand the full how I can connect the dots until my adult life. And so a lot of that was my experience, but I'm sure Dee and Julie had their perspective too.
So who would like to do this? Sure. All right.
Hi everyone, this is Visan here, or friends call me V. Thanks everyone for coming. So very similar experience like Terri. It's very complex. Requires a lot of navigating back and forth. More so navigating through the cultures that I built versus the cultures that was inherited upon from my parents and to me. For me, it was, I guess for me, it's kind of being entangled by a lot of my parents' kind of definitions of what it means to be successful. For instance, my parents, they came here from Vietnam in 1987. So my parents were boat people, and they were set out to sea for about a week. And then I was born in a refugee camp shortly after the war. So a lot of they belong to this idea of survivorship, right? Really fulfilling that Maslow hierarchy of making sure there's food on the table, there's shelter overhead, financially stable. So their priorities are a little bit different. For me, my priority is about finding that community support, engagement, and really fulfilling that self-actualization of what it means to serve in the community, right? What was I being here called for? So there's a lot of going back and forth between that. It wasn't until when I lived in Portland during my nursing school years where I really felt a strong kinship within the Vietnamese diaspora. Being in a place that was very homogenized, there wasn't a lot of folks that kind of looked like us. So when we were able to find people within those communities, we really hold on to each other very strongly, right? And so that's when that affinity to be part of something like a diaspora really came to shine. And that's how a lot of us, myself included, really wanted to create a project and be part of a movement that really shines lights on those stories. And so it was a very complex journey to find my people, to find the strength in diaspora, and really kind of unite that together. So that's been kind of my experience, is just going back and forth and trying to figure out my parents' experience versus my own experience, and learning to navigate between those complexity.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's so exciting to have you here to be able to talk about our work. I initially grew up north of Houston, where there is a bigger ethnic enclave. As Terri was mentioning, there's a larger Vietnamese American community due to a lot of people settling there. My mom moved there in 1978, and I was raised there for the first 9 years of my life. But then I entered foster care and went to live with my father, who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. So the first time I heard someone with a Vietnamese name, I went after him. And I was determined that we were going to be the community that was just referred to. And because I am mixed race, and I'm Cham, which is the ethnic minority of Vietnam, this 100% Vietnamese kid took a look at me and was not convinced. And I tell that playfully because I grew on him. We became really good friends, and he was the first Vietnamese American writer I knew. He was already writing really brilliant stuff at a young age, and thank goodness he let me bond with him, because he's one of the reasons I, kept writing, I think. And so he was on the down low, I would say, because there was so much, there was so little representation for people of color at Broken Arrow that everyone had to figure out where they were going to fit, and it was really hard to have community when there's so few other people of your background. So I actually, like Terri, I didn't really have very much of a sense of the Vietnamese American community until I got older. And I did live in Portland for a while, but I didn't have any Vietnamese American friends there because I couldn't find any at the time. And so it's been a long struggle that's also connected with art practice and academic work, because I deliberately decided to do a master's degree in ethnic studies, which immersed me into Asian American studies, which allowed me a place to finally see more complex representations than what I had seen growing up. And Terri mentioned a page and a half. I remember a paragraph, and the paragraph was along the lines of, the Vietnam War was deeply contentious, so we're not going to talk about it. And so there was a feeling that it was so much of a loss of pride for the United States, that it was impossible to really talk about it, which meant that I had to figure that out on my own. And I went to Hollywood movies. That didn't really help, right? So what was available, in the 80s and 90s to a person trying to learn about Vietnam, if that one paragraph answer doesn't really cover it for you? So it was actually very hard to find people I could talk to, other Vietnamese Americans, other people who even knew where Vietnam was, other people who could understand the fact that my mom was from Vietnam but not really Vietnamese. So I gave really simple answers and didn't have really complex discussions because they couldn't go anywhere for a very long time. And then I do believe that the language given to me around ethnic studies and the understanding of the history of Asian Americans in the United States and the understanding of the refugees through the Southeast Asian study of refugees, the refugee experience, I got a lot more language around what was going on. And then I was involved in an organization called Diaspora Vietnamese Artists Network. I was invited into it maybe in 2010, and after being in that organization, I was able to directly serve art makers and writers, and I was a managing editor for Diacritics, the blog, for about 2 years, and suddenly, over a long period of time, I found that I had built and inserted myself into and was helping to promote a community that had been completely invisible to me and absent from the bookshelves of my libraries and whatnot when I was younger. So I do believe that representation is important because you don't feel quite so alone and other people understand you better if they know more about your people, your background, and whatnot. So it has been really helpful to be in the Bay Area and in an academic setting where I insert these kinds of conversations in to help have more complex discussions about what identity, culture, and experience means in this country and in the world in general.
Thank you all. Okay, so next I'm going to focus a little more. I'd like to bring the focus a little more directly on this project, the Pictures of Remembrance. And if each of you would like to tell us how you got involved with it. And I'd like Julie to start because she's already shown her link to the organization.
This is a funny answer. So I was grant writing for DVAN, and one of my grant writing tasks was to look for money for this project. And as I was looking for money for the project, I was really wanting to be in it. And I thought, is this a conflict of interest? So there's a lot of people affiliated with DVAN on these walls, and that's the nature of community work, including Viet Thanh Nguyen, who was the co-founder of DVAN. And so I realized I should just ask Terri. I think that's what I did. I think I just asked, can I join this exhibit? Because I do a lot of writing, but I specifically wanted to work with imagery for this exhibit. And I kept imagining myself working with imagery. And once you keep seeing something in your head, you probably should act on it. So I do not believe it's a conflict of interest because of the rigorous process of getting in. And I'm very grateful for all the intersections. You know, what community means and looks like. Once you start pulling on a thread, you know, those of us who are interested in these kinds of things, we're going to be crossing paths soon again.
I think for me, it was actually through an email. This was around 2021, I believe so. Yeah, 2021. I was just finished working up in a hospital over the COVID unit over in Oregon. making my way back, moving to the Bay, and I needed to find other ways to outsource my energy, something away from a hospital for a bit. And so it was perfect timing. Both Terri and Rachel reached out through an email saying there's going to be an exhibit of different Vietnamese diaspora creatives for Textures of Remembrance, and I thought to myself, this was a perfect opportunity to not only get my feet wet back into the creative community, but also be part of a movement so much bigger than myself. And so I said yes. And even to this day, I'm very happy to be part of this project and share all these wonderful works with many different folks. So yeah, it all started from an email that was the thread of our conversation, and here we are today.
So how I got involved is also very similar to what Julie was saying, was that I actually got involved with DVAN first, the Diaspora Youth Artist Network, and I started off as a volunteer and then came on part-time as the communications manager. But already when I was involved, I could already see there was already such a huge pool of the community, of wonderful content, especially through the Diacritics blog, and that I felt that it was just a no-brainer that there is an opportunity for an exhibit. And so when I got involved, I wanted to pitch the idea because it was a way to expand DVAN's mission, but also to just continue to build awareness of our perspective, of our representation, as Julie was mentioning, to really continue that conversation. And just thinking about next generation wise, I have my daughter's not in the crowd because she's playing over there, but she's 1.5, and I know that these are stories that I want to pass on to her. And so it just felt like a no-brainer in a sense, where there's this opportunity where I'm connected to the community. I had the museum studies background and the network and collaboration to know organizations like Exhibit Envoy, like DVAN, like OSCC, that it was a way for me to connect the dots and really make this dream project a reality. And so, I reached out and worked with Julie to find funding, reached out to all the artists that was already through the DVAN network, and we also put call for more artists so that we can have more visual artworks. A lot of it was initially prose and written pieces through the Diacritics blog, but we also wanted to incorporate more visual representation, more just artifacts, something that really draws illustration and story home to really share that this is the representation that we always wanted to see in exhibits on the Vietnam board. So that was how I got involved.
All right, thanks again. And moving on to the experiences and sort of that informed this work. And the way I originally phrased this in writing was kind of convoluted, so I'm going to try to narrow it down without making it sound awful. The sort of focus event for this whole show is the fall of Saigon, April 30th, 1975, or liberation, depending on which angle I'm taking on the event. It's a date with a huge amount of meaning for the people who were involved. And the question that Terri provided here is how do people around you, how do you remember that day? What does that signify in your life and in the lives of the people around you? And in particular, mine was on the adults that you grew up with. I think you started. Sure.
So, I know the topic of fall of Saigon or just any war related is very sensitive to a lot of older Vietnamese generations. For my parents, it was kind of the opposite. They usually like to share these stories, especially to their kids, including myself. I remember typically during family dinners or long car rides, a family trip. Anytime there's a moment to share, they would share their stories of what that was like for them. My parents, they left. My mom and my dad actually attempted to escape post-Saigon 1975 3 times. They got caught multiple times, and my mom was in prison during the 2nd time. It was around the 3rd time that they finally made a successful escape. They got on a small boat with no more than probably 50 people, and around nighttime they set sail. They were on the boat for about a week, and my mom was pregnant with me at the time. They finally arrived to Galang, Indonesia refugee camp in 1986, and I was born shortly a few weeks after. And then even the process of trying to get into the States being sponsored was very complicated too. So we stayed in the refugee camp till maybe a year and a half, and I got to Southern California when I was around 2 years old. But I don't have any recollection of what that's like. So, hearing these stories, it really provided my parents kind of a quiet therapy, you would say, where it also served as a measuring tool and a way to kind of gauge, if they were able to go through that, they can go through pretty much anything, whatever life challenges brings to them, So now that my parents are getting older, and technology is not a very fluent language for them. So when it comes to sending like an email, my mom would stress out so much about these little trivial things that may seem trivial to me. And I'm like, Mom, do you remember the time you actually escaped from the war? Like, if you can go through that, Mom, you can send an email. It should not be an issue. But also understanding that she and I come from 2 different separate generations, and I think we have to learn to kind of celebrate these moments of resiliency. So I give thanks to my parents today for being able to put me through what they've gone through in order to continue to share their stories for hopefully many years to come.
Similar to my parents didn't always share the full story. It was definitely in bits and pieces, and I didn't get the full picture until after college, but both of them had different stories coming to America, and they actually met in Maryland. And my dad, which you'll see in my piece, he actually escaped with my half-siblings and his brother, and they originally escaped after the war because he was part of the South Vietnamese Army, and so he was actually a prisoner of war, which he was able to escape. And it was through their escape, they actually got picked up from a naval ship in the middle of the China Sea, where they got him and brought him to Japan as refugees, and they were sponsored by a Catholic church. And so my dad, his family, his immediate family, which was him and my oldest half-brother and oldest half-sister, they came to Maryland, and then his brother, so my uncle and his family, actually was sponsored to Pennsylvania. When my dad came to Maryland, he kind of saw the better opportunities there, and so he actually, rented a car and drove to Pennsylvania to find them. But sorry, I'm going into this story because I didn't find out all this until after college, where we were invited to a naval reunion, and it was through that story where my half brother came up, and he wanted to share the story because it was actually through that experience that he got into government work, and so now he actually works for the Navy in Washington D.C. And so he kind of shared this whole picture that I never knew. And even though my dad had pictures growing up, and he would kind of like mention like tiny tales, it wasn't until my experience after college where I realized there was this community, and there was like more questions that I could ask him, that he was able to share his side. And same thing with my mother's family. I didn't know that she came here because of my great aunt, who was a nurse at the time, and she married a GI doctor, and it was through their, that opportunity that she was able to sponsor my mom's entire family, and she's one of 10. And so it was, her 10 siblings, and also my grandma and grandpa that really, we were able to have this opportunity. And it was, when I think about April 30th and this date, they don't really tie it to that specific date, but it was through the actual experience of leaving and trying to connect these fragment pieces that I wasn't able to get the full picture until really after, when I continued to connect to my community and wanting to understand more of our history, if that makes sense.
So my mother was, at the time in 1975, a widowed wife of a South Vietnamese officer, and she had also been in a relationship with my father for over a year. And my father is an American who was working as a contractor in South Vietnam after the withdrawal of the U.S. military. He had Air Force training, spent his life as an aircraft mechanic. So it wasn't really a typical situation. And even though the South Vietnamese and the U.S. were allies, they have sometimes different perspectives on what was really going on in Vietnam, as you might imagine. So my mother and father left 6 hours before Saigon fell, but their interpretation of the event is very different. And I grew up sort of hearing multiple perspectives, which for a critical thinker is wonderful. For a child, wait, but I thought, so I was always having to figure out what I thought really happened. And it was an interesting experience to have them so directly tied to this anniversary event, and to remember their different interpretations. So I've written poetry about their different interpretations. I've done work around it, knowing that they both represent differences of national opinion and two people who don't get along. And so they ended up divorcing, and so it's an interesting repetition to come back to these different stories that coexist every time I see another anniversary year go by. And so I really, in my own work for the show, I really wanted to lean into reconnecting with that annual reminder of my parents having different perspectives on what was really happening during the evacuation as they were leaving together. They were evacuated by helicopter to an aircraft carrier that was in the South China Sea. So after they left Saigon, they did spend like maybe 10 days or 2 weeks on a refugee boat. So even though my father was an American citizen working there, he went with my mother as a refugee. So they relocated together to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, where there was a refugee camp. And my white father went through the refugee experience with my mom, rather than his privilege allowing my mom to somehow jump over what the refugees were going through. So it was sort of interesting. They each helped each other in certain ways, but they were each harmed by each other in certain ways. by being affiliated with the other person during the evacuation. And that's just a theme I will be continuing to work with and think about during my life. It's not a resolvable thing, it's more like a recognition, right?
Okay, and I'm skipping a couple of things here. I've got one question, a specific question from each of you, and I'm going to circle back to the general ones once we get through those. I'm going to start with Terri here. Your piece of the show, which by the way is right there, the portrait. It combines what seems to be several family photographs, or like paintings of abstracting those photographs as a backdrop for a portrait of your father. What would be your selection process? How did you pick these?
Yeah, great question. So I wasn't able to pick up these pictures until a little bit after the pandemic, because I was living here and my family is still in DC, Montgomery County, Maryland. And a lot of the pictures that I was able to find were the ones that I remember seeing as a kid. And as I was sharing, where when I got, stories, it was through bits and pieces of me looking at this picture, and I was like, wait, is that, where is this? When did you go to Japan? So there's all these questions that I had, and my dad would never, and my mom would never kind of share the full story. It was just like, oh yeah, that was like, there was a time when we were there, and then that was it. And so when I had the opportunity to create this piece, I really wanted it to kind of be like the foundation of the biggest memory that I had when I first wanted to tap into my history and understanding where I came from and how why we were the only Vietnamese Americans in our school. And so it really tied in together what was representative of my family and my dad's story, my parents' story. I wish I was able to collect more, but because I was only able to come home for that weekend, I grabbed as much as I could. And I think if there was an opportunity to change the piece, it would be to incorporate more pictures and also include pictures of today where it's representing my generation, having my siblings. Right now I had a couple of pictures of my siblings and I graduating from college and grad school, but now we're grown. My father has children. He's also in the Navy now too, so it's really great to see the way that the ripple effect of really significant stories that came about from my father's escape, that I really wanted to have that representation in kind of like the collage that I have going. So yeah. You don't know what the question is. I'm actually confused because I sent them to you. So I'm gonna have to say tag Julie next on this one. In your statement, you note that you chose the helicopter evacuation from 2221, Geelong Street, because it captures a key aspect of the refugee experience overall, and your mother's experience in particular. You touched on this a little bit in your previous answer, but do you have a little more for us?
Sure. So this may be a recognizable image to some of you in the corner. It's usually shown cropped and in black and white. It was taken by a Dutch photographer who was documenting the end there, or the beginning, depending on which perspective you have. And my parents left off of that same helicopter evacuation point that day, so I've never known for sure whether or not it was a family photograph. And the ambiguity of that gave me a strong relationship to the picture, into the image, into the experience of seeing it almost every year. They would run the same image. It's the iconic image, right? And I heard misinterpretations of it. I heard it was off the embassy, and it's not. I hear the things that weren't quite right. And so when I wanted to be part of this exhibit, I wanted to revisit imagery that was connected to me. And this is one of the pieces that floated up in my mind. And so I thought I would see if I could actually buy the image itself or license it, and what that process would be like. As a filmmaker, these are the kinds of things you would do. And so I looked into the licensing process, and just to license the image for reuse, it would have been $500. And I thought, how ironic, because it may be a family photograph. And it would cost me $500 to use it, but not if I paint it. So, yes, transformative use. Exactly. So as a painter, as somebody who has a background in fine arts, I knew I had the skill to render it if I committed to it. But I also wanted it to be my own in a way. So I put it in color, which isn't normally how it's seen, but there were color images, as you might imagine. And there was a bunch of images taken over time, and it included wider shots that aren't cropped. And it showed the rest of the sky, what Saigon looked like at the time. It showed the trees that hadn't been defoliated with Agent Orange. And it showed the rest of the life, and it felt more like a witness when you zoom out. But in the photographs I saw, the people were very blurry because of the zooming in and cropping in 35 millimeter. So they were always very blurry. And I considered keeping them super blurry, but I also wanted to give them a bit more life. Like, they're still people, more so than the images that I had seen. Because I always looked to see if my mom was there. Right? So I looked closely, and like, you can't see who anybody is, which gave it the ambiguity, right? So I did almost everything to journalistic accuracy, except the people I gave more life to. And I allowed you to see some of them holding each other or helping the other person up. And so that for me was a humanizing choice, even though it's still seen from a distance. Seeing the rest of the sky and the skyline and the buildings is also a humanizing choice. This is a community of people. There were many people witnessing these events that day, and the photographer, I'm grateful he was there to take the picture, but I also want to be able to access the work on my own terms if it's a family photograph. And in my memory, it became a family photograph because there's no way to say they're not in the picture, which gave me this relationship to the image that I wanted to lead into. So I challenged myself to do the first realistic painting I'd done in a really long time, years, because I knew I needed to interact with that particular press photograph and make it my own and do the research to see, what it means to have it be mine and not belong to Getty Images.
Okay, so my question for you involves, it's a process one really. Your project involves working a lot with other people's memories and other people's stories. So how do you collaborate with your subjects to produce those photographs? Where's your hand, so to speak, in depicting their hands and the stories that they tell?
That is a very great question. Well, I would say, so the inspiration behind the photo project itself really stemmed from a quote that I've heard and also from my own personal experience watching my parents work with their hands. the quote that I will paraphrase is from the Buddhism Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, if you look at your own hands, you not only see your own flesh, but you also see the lines and the contours all leading to your parents, as well as your parents' parents, and towards the lineage of your ancestors, right? And the personal experience also having to see my parents working with their own hands. They work as manicurists all of their lives. They work in the nail salon, where they sacrifice their own hands to beautify the other hands of others. So I've been really fascinated with the narrative of hands, and so to speak. So when it comes to finding my subject, it also started one time I was going through the attic and I saw this very particular photo of my dad at the refugee camp, standing in front of all these paintings that he had done. Kind of had like a little art gallery exhibit as of today. And to me, that added a different layer of depth of who he is versus who I thought he was during my time growing up with him, seeing him working 24/7. So having these inspirations in my life, I wanted to reach out to the folks. Predominantly the people that I took photos of are people living in Portland and a few here in the Bay Area. But it was a way for me to reach out to people within marginalized communities, especially during the time where xenophobia was very high up in Portland at the time, 4 years plus more, right? I wanted to kind of shed light on who they are and celebrate their diversity, but also realizing that they're very quite similar to many different folks in different types of community. And so I asked them each a question to bring a particular heirloom or any type of object that represents sort of their origin story and their transition here into this country. And I want you to hold on to it. And while you're holding on to this photo or a piece of cloth or jewelry or what have you, I'm going to be placing my hands on my camera on top of their hand as they're holding this. So it's kind of superimposing two different experiences together. And that project was very difficult to be a part of because it requires a level of trust and transparency and openness to let someone to be very vulnerable in sharing their stories and trusting that their stories are safe. And so, hence the project is called Stories We Carry. It's literally a piece of item that represents such a huge part of who they are in their hands. And so that's sort of the genesis of that project.
Okay, and so I really want to ask this question though, so we just want to run a little bit long and open it up to the audience after I get responses from anybody who wants to answer about this. One of the organizing principles of this show is ethnic identity and membership in this experience of the diaspora. But other identities such as gender also play a greater or lesser part in a lot of the works here. So I wanted to ask each of you what other identities you brought into your work for the show.
I'll get mine out of the way. Because my parents are an interracial couple and of different nationalities, and I was born in the United States to a very recent refugee, there are ways that my mixed race identity and my multinational identity play into my interactions with this piece and with the image itself, the thing that's being depicted in the subject matter. So I would say for me, the biggest determining other identity is holding a mixed race identity in which my mother was leaving her home to go live in my dad's home, like at that moment. And so, as I said earlier, it's not like I can resolve their disagreements or different interpretations of things. I just live with them. I just live with and have an understanding of multiple sides, I guess. And that is something I will continue to negotiate with whatever work I produce that connects back to the war or the post-war experience.
So for me personally, the identity that I was able to bring in was actually my creative and artist side. As you heard from my bio, I'm not an artist. I'm a nonprofit professional, but this project was really important to me because I was able to bring it full circle in really representing my family story, and it meant a lot because actually when I made the decision to, choose a career in museums, choose a major in art history and history, my parents were actually not quite happy. They didn't understand. They thought I was going to be a starving artist, and so it just this side of my work they never quite understood, and so it was my way of honoring them, but also honoring my career choice and my path and my way of really honoring that identity of myself and there's a lot of wounds that I was able to heal through this process, and so I was really grateful for this opportunity.
I'll make it. So for me, the identity I also bring into this project was also my identity as a cardiac nurse. And it was really focusing on the therapeutic communication and that trust and that empathy and compassionate to the people that were being photographed. It even reflects on how I work in my occupation too. It's just learning to kind of turn off that any, prejudice or any idea of who I think they are, whether you're from the same community or different social castes, things of that sort. But just being willing to listen. And I think that's the most important thing, is just to turn down any prejudgment that I may have about a person and learning to allow them to express themselves and let their story shine in the way that they tell it. So really honing down that therapeutic communication was one of the strengths that I used for this project. And even that project we've been talking today about just be a better human being.
All right, then, thanks. So this is the time when I throw it open to the audience for questions. Does anybody want to? All right, I think we covered everything. Oh, Heather, okay.
When I first came in, when it was first set up, and I saw that picture, of course,
Hold on just a minute. I think
We're going to give you a mic too.
so that you can be heard.
when I first came in, and it had just been set up, and I put my things down, and I came back in the room to look at everything. And I saw that picture, and the first thing I said, and I think I said it out loud, is, "Oh, you make it look so pretty." And then I had this little feeling, like, this wasn't a pretty thing. And it bothered me that it had been almost cheerful looking. When I remember this picture, because I was in high school between 70 and 74, and this, to me, puts terror in me, and I can almost feel the desperation, even though it's prettier than it was. But there were so many things, and then when I started reading around the wall, I started crying. I said, I have to be here to meet people. I can't read these things right now. And so, because, I'm old enough to grow up with Vietnam War on television, and I think a lot of people who are my age feel the same way. And to this day, when we hear helicopters low, it makes us kind of sick to our stomachs. And so that was my first question: is who made it look so great? I actually have a question about it. I was wondering if you were tempted to make your parents into it?
The question is, was I tempted to paint my parents into it? No, not really, because they are there and they're not. I mean, that's the ambiguity of the image has always held that ambiguity, and I didn't want it to be certainly they were there, and I didn't want to say they're not there, you know, and so I just wanted the figures to feel human, like they were going through an experience and not just smudges, impressionistic smudges across the way. But I didn't intend to necessarily make it their story, but I know it could be, and that's part of my relationship to the image itself. And Heather's point made me think about how an image like this is still an aesthetic experience. And so as a painter, I'm really grateful for it working as a painting. And I appreciate that it's more than just that, the beauty of the image.
You emotionally have an experience. And whether it's good or whether it's sad or bad or whatever, that's connected to the art. And for some people, it always will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate the complexity of that interaction with it too. So thank you for bringing that up.
Anyone else?
I actually had another question. So, I hate it's kind of an awful question, but if you have one piece of art or one piece of writing that you would recommend for people to learn about either Vietnamese culture or how we interact with Asian people that improve our understanding of Vietnamese culture, is there any one thing, or 5 things, or whatever you might point to?
Our suggested list.
Yeah, the reading list, but artwork.
Everybody looks at the ethnic study.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I understand this is wonderful, I know it's stalling, so.
Well, I would recommend a collection of short stories by Amy Fon called We Should Never Meet. And it's a collection of interrelated stories about orphans who left during Operation Baby Lift. And some of the stories are on the ground in Vietnam. The babies are still babies, and some of them are in the United States after they've been adopted. And it's such a rich portrayal of what those who went through that experience could have gone through. It's fiction, but her mother was a social worker who worked with the Operation Baby Lift. And it's a part of history that you may know about, but not from the perspective of a Vietnamese writer. It was published in 2006, and she went on to write other things. But I really think that as a short story, it's very powerful. You can do one at a time as short stories, but she lays in threads that you'll see like 100 pages later, her just sort of skillfully pick up. And I would read that collection. You can get it from the library or buy it, at your local bookstore.
I guess it kind of depends on what exactly you're hoping to want to learn. Because I've been more fascinated about the children of parents who have to learn how to navigate through their Vietnamese diaspora. I mean, the one person I can think of on top of my head, which is very popular within younger Viet gens, is Ocean Vuong, the poet. I can't think of the name of it was the poetry that was written right after On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is actually turned into a movie pretty soon by A24. But there's if you type up their name, Ocean Vuong, they're like a very beautiful prose writer, I would say, and the poetry itself is quite beautiful. There's this one particular piece where he was dedicating to his mother, who just recently passed away to cancer, and I won't spoil anything, but it's just a list of things their mother bought on Amazon. And you can see the trajectory of the purchase history, and that purchase history itself tells a story, right? If you can find that poetry at your local bookstore, as well, which I can't think of the name of the title. It's been a long time since I've read that.
It's not nice. That's the first one.
That's the first one, yeah. The second one is good. You should be able to find it. It's a really beautiful piece. I definitely recommend those to read it if you're interested in learning about the children of the war and basically what their experience of led them to.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of put in a gentle plug of Dire Critics, the blog on Debian. I mean, it's a huge resource of, veteran writers and also up-and-coming writers who are Vietnamese American and really share their perspective, their interpretation, whether it's nonfiction or fictional, or even just a lot of Vietnamese Americans or a Vietnamese diaspora, really kind of where they are in life. We also showcase chefs and artists and filmmakers, and it's just a wonderful resource, and I would suggest starting there as well.
All right, well, thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for coming to here. I'm very pleased with the results. So it's cookie time. There's cookies and water out in the gift shop right now on a table, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves.